But what I will do in this presentation is approaching the concept of internalization of populism through the lenses of social semiotics. That's the discipline I work, I do. And when I found out about this seminar, I really thought it would be a good opportunity to approach the concept of internalization of populism as a phenomenon that is linked to the replication of social discourses, and that's why I thought it would be interesting to present some ideas coming from the field of semiotics. What I'm going to say is based on a book that I will be publishing in February. I think it's going to be. It's called The Social Semiotics of Populism, and then I present an approach to populism from semiotics that is an approach that doesn't compete with the existing approaches, right? It's just an additional way of having a look at this political phenomenon from the account that I will present today. So the plan for what I want to say is, first I want to present this idea of populism as a discursive practice. Yeah, this doesn't deny that it might be an ideology, a strategic way of acting in the public sphere and so on, but it's undeniable that it's a way of doing things with discourse in the public sphere. Then I'm going to introduce the key concept of a semiotic approach to populism, that is the idea of the populist narrative structure. And then based on that narrative structure, I will try to put forward two claims. The first one is that the empty position of the people, which as we will see is constitutive of the populist narrative structure, can be filled with content that do not revolve around national contexts only. Yeah, we can think of sub-national types of populism, supranational types of populism, transnational forms of populism. This is something that has been evidenced in the presentations we had yesterday and today. And the second claim is that as a social discourse, populist discourse can easily travel from one political context to another. Yeah, so this might be very evident, but I think it's interesting to have a look at how the copying or imitation of social discourses grants the possibility of one nation that hadn't seen populist discourse emerge can do so thanks to the role, for example, that media play in shaping the politics. So as an introduction of what I have been trying to do for the last 3 years, more or less, and that will crystallize in this book, The Social Semiotics of Populism. I mean, I've been reading a lot on populism, and from every account, yeah, I was not only married to one, I was trying to take into account the political scientist view and the discourse theoretical views and the performative and those by communication scholars. And so I really had like a deep dive into populism studies, this federation of disciplines gathered around the object of study of populism. I was very much interested as a practitioner of semiotics into the discursive or discourse theoretical accounts of populism. We know they are not the same. Discourse theoretica is Ernesto Laclau and their followers, yeah, which is a kind of political theory, quite abstract, with empirical cases, but it's above all a political theory, ontology. And discursive accounts are more or less what critical discourse analysts or discourse analysts like Ruth Wodak or Patrick Chardot have been doing. In the studies of populism, semiotics, yeah, and when I speak of semiotics, I refer to the discipline. Yes, I'll say something about this in a while. It's not about the semiotics of populism. Yeah, it's about how semiotics can say something about populism. It has been usually ignored or left aside. Only very recently, in 2018 and 2019, some semiotic journals published special issues on populism. But of course, the approaches vary. Yeah, they are not always grounded in empirical studies, and sometimes they remain at a theoretical level. The big problems of semiotics is precisely this echo chambering. Yeah? So what I've been trying to do is a work of articulation of different theoretical inputs. Yes, semiotics, the main discipline, but also political theory, discourse studies, in the line of Laclau and the Essex School, the French discourse analysis, pragmatics as well, and practical philosophy. So semiotics, which is the approach I have been trying to use to make sense of populism, it is a discipline within the social sciences. Yeah? It works always with a corpus of analysis, with texts, with practices, and applies particular methods. Yeah? The discipline emerged based on the works of Ferdinand de Saussure and Charles Sanders Peirce. Given that we are in Denmark, I think it's mandatory to mention Louis Hemslet, who was the key figure in translating Saussure's general linguistics into a pre-semiotics. And nowadays, there are a couple of strands of semiotic research. We have the structuralist or generative semiotics, whose main figure is Aguirre Greimas. Then Umberto Eco and his disciples in Italy with interpretative semiotics. In the Baltic area, there is the cultural semiotics of Yuri Lotman. In Latin America, particularly in Argentina, the work of Eliseo Verón, focusing on social discourses, has been super relevant for the study of political discourses. And in the English-speaking world, we have this so-called Sydney group and the concept of multimodality. There are different approaches. They share some premises, but they also have different vocabulary and methods of working. But they all share a couple of premises. The first one is constructivism. Yeah, so no one working in semiotics assumes that anything within the social is given. Yes, and this is a very interesting commonality with the work of Laclau and Mouffe, particularly the discourse theory that they put forward in hegemony and socialist strategy. The focus of semiotics is going to be set on how meaning in some sense emerge. Yeah? So the process of creation of meaning and how these meanings are interpreted. So there is a two-way method here. One is how someone who wants to communicate particular meanings creates a structure that can be interpreted by someone else as meaningful. And the second step is how these interpretations work. The concept of multimodality or syncretism, these are synonyms, but multimodality is more for the English-speaking community and syncretism for the French one. We're going to look at words, images, gesture, music, attire, attitudes, and a lot of resources that can be meaningful. Yeah, for example, how I look at someone can be meaningful, and this is something that semiotics will take into account. And something else that is relevant to understand what semiotics is trying to do is this distinction proposed by Hemslet between the dimension or plane of the content and the dimension of the expression. There are contents available in culture, but if I want to communicate them, I need to somehow express through an articulation of, in this case, words. Yeah, on the contrary, you, my receivers, you are listening to what I say, and you are decoding those words, and this perception of the expression will take you to the content that I'm trying to express. So what I have been trying to do is approaching populism from this perspective with a particular focus on social semiotics. Yeah, the branch of semiotics focused on cultural phenomena such as practices, interactions, memory, conflict, styles of life, the use of space and the relationship with space, and so on. Within social semiotics, and here for me the big name is that of Eliseo Verón, who was an Argentinian semiotician who did his career in Paris. Semiotics studies the production, circulation, and consumption of discourses in the public sphere. Yeah, so the concept of discourse is very relevant. It's a very innocent concept of discourse. Yeah, it doesn't have the implications that, for example, the French scholarship has, or critical discourse analysis linking, for example, discourses with power relationships and with ideology. Here the idea is, okay, we're going to identify a discourse that is circulating in society and map or try to make sense of how is it that it emerged and circulates in particular context. Eliseo Verón said or wrote in one of his books that every social phenomenon has a discursive dimension linked to meaning making, and this is as well the case for populism. Populism can perfectly be a political strategy, can be an ideology, or whatever you want, depending on the approach that you prefer, but it's undeniable that it has a dimension linked with meaning making. Populists, or political actors labeled as populists, they do things in the public sphere to produce particular meanings that are cognitive and affective as well. And that's why the examination of the enunciation is relevant. Yeah, so how is that text are created conveying particular meanings? Good. A semiotic account of populism, or at least this is what I'm trying to develop during the last couple of years, is that populism should be regarded as a discursive practice with a focus on the use of semiotic resources. This is, in my view, what explains that we speak of right-wing and left-wing populism. If we can think of Donald Trump as a populist, one person that is part of the 1% of society or of the elite, being capable of articulating a discourse that is populist, in essence, then this is the case because, and this is what I put forward in that book, is that what defines populism from the discursive perspective is the use of a particular narrative structure that is the populist narrative structure. This structure is a couple of empty formulas, empty spaces that oppose a people, with all the ambiguities and vagueness and polysemy of this concept versus an other. In my view, or what I got from my research, is that this other doesn't need to be the elite. There are different others, but in any case, that other is going to be represented in this course as not being part of the people and as an enemy. That is someone that is posing a threat to the integrity or well-being of the people. And this is the component, of course, of antagonism that scholars of populism have identified since, I would say 1969. This idea that there is a clash between the people who might be pure, as Casimir said, or not, but there is always going to be this particular relationship with an other. So the semiotic approach, and I apologize for this image, it's my initial drawing that the publisher will redraw. The idea of the semiotics of populism is examining how the dichotomization of society that is at the base of populism, I'm speaking of the circle below, right? We have the circle below, it's society as represented in populist discourse, and there is a gap between the people and the people's other. These are abstract concepts or collective identities that populist political actors, depending on the context where they operate and the political contents that are relevant in those contexts, are going to construct discursively through a process that has these 4 steps: generalization, actualization, actilogization, and figurativization. I won't enter into this, but the idea is we know that there is an abstract category called the people. One of my questions yesterday was trying to point out to the idea of distinguish, okay, el pueblo or la gente in Spanish, collective of individuals, and somehow of group that is somehow related through something that can be the civic dimension or the ethnical dimension. But in any case, there is going to be a construction that we are going to be able as researchers to access through the examination of texts. When we go and look at what Donald Trump said in rallies or what Marine Le Pen says in her advertisements, we are going to identify a particular way of representing and constructing the people. 15 minutes? Later. Great. So, in any case, this construction is always going to, this is the semiotic square put forward by Greimas, based on the work of Aristoteles. We're going to have the people whose logical contrary is not the people. But this definition of not the people in negative terms needs to be translated, because in discourse, people need positive contents to make sense of reality. So instead of saying, okay, we are the people, but those who are not the people are our enemies, it's more efficient and more effective to construct a scapegoat, yeah, and that's how the people's other comes to be. That can be the elite, La Casta, the establishment, the European Union, and so on. Different enemies that serve as a construction of the identity of the people. So going to the two claims I wanted to make. The first one is, given this ambiguity or this general scope of the category of the people, in English, of course, in other languages as well, we can think of a subnational type of populism. Yeah, that is a construction of a social discourse revolving around a people that is inside a given nation. Yeah, and I could think of Catalonia, I can think of independence movements, and we can discuss if this is national, if this is subnational. But there are other articulations that can be subnational as well. For example, in Uruguay, my home country, one of the regions, which are administrative regions and not related to any type of historical development, like in Spain, for example, or Germany, they might say, okay, we want more benefits for the people from this particular region. And this case would be a type of subnational feeling of the empty category of the people in the narrative, in the populist narrative structure. Of course, this content can be national, it can be national, the Danes, the Spaniards, the Uruguayans, it can be supranational, the Europeans, the Latin Americans. We can think of a European people or of a Latin American people as opposed, for example, in Chavez's discourse, to US American imperialism. And these kind of discourses have been enunciated by political actors. We can think, of course, of a transnational content, like an alliance of the underdogs pledged from various countries united, something similar to Eurocommunism, the idea that there are portions of European societies that need to get together and have a particular political agency. But the key aspect here is that there is always going to be a discursive construction of an other that gathers the we together. Yeah? In any of these levels, the construction of the collective identity, the people, be it in subnational, national, supranational, or transnational terms, will depend on the identification of someone who is posing a threat to us. Yeah, this is the first claim that I would like to make for discussion. And in 1 minute, I will present this idea of internationalization of populism. Yeah, and of course, what I'm thinking here is not so much in creating a type of populism that is international like Eurocommunism, but I'm thinking more on how is it possible that one political context, let's say Uruguay, my country, where populism hasn't been identified, could start having some discourses identified as populist. Yeah, and this, for example, depends much on the so-called hyper-mediatization of politics. Yeah? The political field is now driven or heavily driven by content that are guided by the logic of the media. And for example, in Argentina now we have a right-wing populist, the libertarian called Javier Milei, and it wouldn't be a surprise that in a couple of years, through the exposure in social media, in traditional media, and so on, to these discourses, the Uruguayan public sphere will replicate these social discourses. It happens with fashion. Yeah, the same happens with political movements. So as a vague and ambiguous category, the people can be filled with different contents as opposed to the indigenous group of a society. In Uruguay, for example, where the native population has been exterminated, it wouldn't be easy to construct a type of ethno-populism. Yeah, I'm done, so I will skip the conclusions. Just the concept of internationalization. Okay, there are different concepts of internationalization of populism, right? One is a copy in a new context of a phenomenon that has been somewhere else. But also the idea of what, for example, Oscar presented yesterday, the idea of a supranational or something, a coordination of populism that is bigger than the national context. The relevance, of course, of studying the discursive dimension of internationalization, yeah, how is that populism is copied and how reference to one another contexts are presented. And of course, in this quest, the study of enunciation and meaning making grounded in the use of the populist narrative structure is very important. So thank you very much for your attention and looking forward to hearing your comments.